Hey everyone, this is Nick and welcome back to your weekly Linux and open source news show. This week we've got the potential release date for Elementary OS 8, which is going to be in September. We've got an immutable version of Manjaro. We've got more progress on GNOME 47. We obviously have the release of the Cosmic Alpha, but you already know about this. We've got Nvidia allegedly scraping millions and millions of YouTube videos to train their AI unethically, if not illegally, and a lot more. And we also have this segue to our sponsor. This video is sponsored by TuxCare, a regular sponsor of the channel and your provider of solutions to ensure your workstation and server fleet stay up to date and secure. They offer extended lifecycle support for end-of-life distros like CentOS or older versions of Ubuntu, as well as a zero reboot live patching solution for all popular enterprise Linux distros, as well as enterprise support for Alma Linux. And this week they're giving you a free downloadable report that will give you a look at the recent surge in vulnerability ideas being issued for the Linux kernel, as the Linux kernel project recently became a CVE numbering authority. And their recent output means that organizations must now grapple with a massive increase in CVEs that they have to deal with. The report will give you all the tools to understand how all this happened and how it impacts your organization and its security and compliance efforts. The download is free and doesn't require any email or personal information, so click the link in the description to get access to it and read it. So let's begin with Elementary OS, and they saw some more progress towards the release of Elementary OS 8, meaning that technically, if everything goes well, they should see a final release in September. Now, in terms of the changes, they've decided to rename the available sessions in the login manager. The X11 session will be called Compatibility Session, and the Wayland session will be called Secure Session, which I feel does a good job of abstracting the current benefits of each system without highlighting their drawbacks too much. There was also some more accessibility work on the onboarding app to make sure that you can navigate the first thing you see when you're using your system, using the keyboard and a screen reader, and they've also decided to tidy up packaging for a few things like the Bluetooth daemon, the phone viewer now being shipped as a Flatpak, and a few other things. Elementary OS 7 also got a few nice updates because most of their default apps are Flatpaks, and so they gained a facelift for the video player, the text editor gained a few options and features, they gained support for a bunch of portals for Flatpak apps like the color picker, screenshot and screencast portals, and the music and camera apps also got some updates. Now, as per the release of Elementary OS 8, everything should now be in the stable repo, so they should be able to build the first early access ISOs really soon. Apparently, they're just waiting to finish the window manager protocol for their new dock, which is a brand new application, so it can work properly on X11 and not just on Wayland. And so if things go well, Elementary OS 8 should be out in September. And I know Elementary OS is not a major distro by any metric. I mean, as far as we know, we don't really have numbers, but it's supposed to be a pretty small distribution, but it's the one I started this channel on, and I will always have a special fondness for what they do, the level of polish they bring, and even though I don't agree with everything that they do, I will still absolutely review this distro on the channel when it releases, hopefully in September. Now, this week we also got some details about what is coming to GNOME 47 and also GNOME 48. So for 47, we're going to see a lot more HDR work. A new patch set has been merged for Mutter, GNOME's compositor, which will allow reading the temperature for the color manager. It will let the compositor apply HDR calibration, it will let it set the color space for the display, and it basically contains all the groundwork that will be necessary to let GNOME actually enable HDR in the future. There was also another merge request that wasn't merged yet but has been marked for inclusion in GNOME 47, and that's one to handle SDR white luminance as a variable and also to set the HDR content brightness. Both of those things are necessary to display SDR and HDR content side by side. Now, as per what is going to come in GNOME 48, it's the ability to just double-click an ISO image from the GNOME file manager to get a bunch of options. All of these options being powered by the GNOME Disks app, which will come in GNOME 48 at the same time as its GTK4 rewrite. This little pop-up will let you mount the ISO immediately, or open it with an archive manager, or write it to a drive, or just inspect it in the Disks app. It's cool stuff. The problem is, it's only gonna come to GNOME 48 because GNOME doesn't ship their apps separately from the desktop, which kinda sucks. I wish they adopted the same kind of workflow as KDE, where you've got the KDE Gear compilation, so you can get up-to-date apps even if the desktop didn't specifically receive an update. As per HDR support, I don't expect GNOME 47 to have a user-visible toggle to enable HDR directly in the display settings like KDE currently has, but at least they're laying down some groundwork to have that support, and the more desktops try their hand at implementing HDR, the easier it will be to define an actual protocol, because they will have fallen into every pitfall and encountered every major problem, so the protocol will probably be much better for it. Now, Manjaro has an immutable version now. It is still in testing, and it is built around the ArcDep toolkit, something initially developed by the Arcane Linux distro. It is a toolset to build, to deploy, and to maintain a BetterFS-based immutable system. And it is still in active development, meaning it is not stable in the slightest, and it is pretty much untested yet. This means that in turn, Manjaro's immutable distro is also very experimental and absolutely not ready for production. You can test it publicly with an ISO, which apparently works in a VM, fortunately, and it defaults to GNOME, although you will be able to install KDE on it if you want. Now, as far as I understand it, ArcDep, the core of that immutable Manjaro distro, is a shell script that uses Bash to handle BetterFS snapshots and uses wget and curl to download system images in the form of BetterFS snapshots, and then systemd and a bunch of other tools to make sure that this latest snapshot is the one you will reboot on. This should, in theory, make that script pretty accessible and robust, because it mainly depends on tools that every distro has access to. So for example, for Manjaro, they're just hosting new system images in an HTTP repo, and ArcDep can download that using wget or curl, and it can run a few shell commands to just create a BetterFS snapshot out of this system image, or just install this BetterFS snapshot and then set it as the default boot target for the next reboot. I've never been the biggest fan of Manjaro, but honestly, this sounds pretty cool. Having your entire immutable distro base built on a bash script that a lot of people will be able to just read, understand, tweak, and debug if need be is, in my opinion, a pretty good idea. You're not getting all the nice graphical tools that stuff like Vanilla OS might offer, but your entire distro core is built on a scripting language that a lot of Linux users are already very familiar with. Now, obviously, I have to talk about the Cosmic Desktop Alpha here. Again, I did not want to put it in the title because it's been like 3 videos that the Cosmic Desktop has been like the main headline, so it's stuffed in the middle of this news video. If you already watched my video on the Cosmic Desktop Alpha, you can skip this part and go to the next chapter. If you're not that interested but you want to learn more about it anyway, then here it comes. So, System 76 released this Cosmic Desktop Alpha, and it's a really solid first look at what Pop! OS users will be able to get their hands on soon. Everything that you would expect from a desktop is here. You can customize the top panel and the dock however you want. You can swap any of the applets between the two. You can hide the dock entirely. You have the auto tiling features with window stacking, mouse and keyboard interaction, per workspace styling. You also have fractional scaling with the Wayland protocol. You have the basic settings in there, a few default apps that are pretty bare bones but do their job well. You have full coloring/theming support for Cosmic apps and GTK apps. And of course you have a lot of missing stuff like variable refresh rate, HDR, translucency, accessibility, and more. The alpha, in my experience, was pretty stable. It's more a case of it's lacking features than it's super buggy, even though there were a few bugs and visual problems. You can already download an ISO for Pop! OS 24.04 Alpha, which will get you the Cosmic Alpha, or you can try that Alpha desktop under Fedora, NixOS, or Arch, thanks to individuals packaging this thing as third-party efforts. And if you watch the video, you'll know I was sort of impressed with it. There's nothing in Cosmic that will make me want to ditch Plasma in its current state. Even if it was finalized and stable, I would probably prefer using GNOME to Cosmic because it's more advanced and more polished. But I see where Cosmic is going, and it's gonna be very interesting to have a desktop developed by a company for their customers first. It is not a community project first, it is a project made by a commercial entity which also has a community side where everyone can contribute. And this means the focus will be very different from what we're seeing in GNOME or KDE, because they're gonna want to fix the problems that their customers have, not the problems that they feel are the most important because they decided it is, which I think may be a game changer. So I would be very surprised if in a few years Cosmic hadn't caught up and even surpassed KDE or GNOME. For now, I would personally not decide to use it in its current state, even if it was fully stable, but there is a lot of potential here. Now, we're also going to see some changes coming to Ubuntu, specifically on the usual fixed kernel version model that they've been using since the creation of Ubuntu. What they currently do is they take the latest version of the kernel that is released at the time they have their distro feature freeze, and then they will stick to that. They will maintain this version throughout the life of the distro, only providing security updates and potentially newer drivers with the hardware enablement stack. But this meant that in a lot of cases, since Ubuntu's release window was not synced with the kernel's release window, they tended to ship months-old versions of the kernel. And these generally aren't supported for that long, so it could end up being detrimental. Now, what Ubuntu is going to do is they will simply ship the latest stable kernel that is supposed to be made available at the time of the final release of a new version of Ubuntu. This also means that if that version of the kernel is pushed back a week or two, they will still ship their stable Ubuntu release with a release candidate version of the kernel, and they will update that to the stable kernel when it is available. Now, this does not mean that this kernel version will receive major updates during the lifecycle of the distro. You will still be stuck on the same kernel version for the entirety of the distro's life. You will just be sure to get the latest version that is currently being worked on when Ubuntu gets released. For example, let's take Ubuntu 32.04. It's supposed to release in April 2032, and in the old current model, it would release with the kernel 9.15 because that's the stable version that is available at the time 32.04 enters beta. But the kernel 9.16 is still in development and should release in April as well. So under the new model, 32.04 will release in April with the kernel 9.16. Not the latest stable 9.15, but the currently being developed 9.16, because it is in release candidate, and even if it gets pushed back, at least they will have a stronger, newer version of the kernel for the release of Ubuntu that they want to ship in a few weeks. And it looks like Linus Torvalds was right to flip the bird to Nvidia all of these years ago, because now they've allegedly scraped gigantic volumes of YouTube videos without permission, all to develop their own commercial AI project like their digital human generator, a 3D world generator, or self-driving car systems. Nvidia didn't really deny it, they even sort of confirmed it, because they said that their research is in full compliance with the letter and spirit of copyright laws. And they stated that IP laws protect specific expressions, but not facts, ideas, data, or information. So they basically meant that training a computer program with millions of hours of videos in the span of a few months was the same as a human watching that exact same amount of content to learn, which is obviously completely ridiculous just as a matter of scale and general purpose. Nvidia employees who raised ethical and legal questions were told that Nvidia wanted this and it was an executive decision. Nvidia also apparently used a library of 130 million YouTube videos that had a license which restricted their use for academic purposes only, but Nvidia didn't care. Nvidia also clearly knew this wasn't allowed because they downloaded these videos using a VM with rotating IP addresses, so they would not be banned for that download. And the argument that an AI accessing millions of hours of publicly available, but not free for use, content is doing the exact same thing as what a human would do with access to the same resource is so stupid that it hurts just to think about it. On one hand, you've got one human with a limited amount of time, a limited capacity of remembering things, and a very limited capability of selling access to this data or even selling the work that they based on this data. Because if you go to an employer and tell them, I watched 130 million YouTube videos on how to make cars, hire me to design your car, you're not getting the job. On the other hand, you've got an AI who is able to learn all that content a million times faster, has absolutely perfect recall, can ignore every single license, and has infinite possibilities of monetizing this because apparently people are willing to pay for access for a computer tool that does worse than a human would do with access to the same thing. Seriously, the sooner this generative AI bubble bursts, the sooner we can actually work on useful applications of AI tools and features that improve the work of humans instead of trying to badly replace it. And now finally for the gaming related stuff, something that has little chance of happening, but I'm still going to talk about it. There's a new proposed European law to force game developers to maintain various titles instead of simply shuttering the servers and making their games disappear entirely. This is proposed through the European Citizen Initiative. This is a process where if a petition gets 1 million signatories, it is actually examined. The idea is to require publishers that sell video games in the EU to leave these games in a playable state, even after they stop supporting them, meaning they could not remotely disable the game by shutting down the login servers or the servers in general. They would have to provide reasonable means to let players continue playing the game that they bought. To support this, they cite various articles of EU law that state that no one can be deprived of their possessions, and also that the EU has an obligation to promote the interests of consumers and to protect these consumers. This petition will stay up for about a year, and EU citizens can vote for it right now. It currently has more than 200,000 signatures after about a week, so don't hesitate to share it and make sure that people actually sign it if you reside in the EU and if you know people who reside in the EU. I mean, that's just if you think that it is unacceptable for publishers to make you pay $70 for a game and then stop supporting it and then you cannot play the game that you bought. I know you only bought a license for this game, but this is also complete BS, and it would basically cost zero for publishers to just release a binary for the current state of their servers and say, here you go, run that, we patch the game so we can detect individual private servers, you handle the moderation, you handle everything, we just don't want to hear about it, but at least you can keep playing the game on your own private server or public server if you prefer. Doesn't even mean releasing the source code, just a binary that lets you run the server, authenticate to the game if need be. I think it's a reasonable ask, so if you think so as well, click the link in the description, sign the petition. If you're in the EU, I'm sure it has a US variant somewhere. Just like I'm sure there's another sponsor segue somewhere, right here actually. It's Tuxedo Computers. You know about them by now. They make computers that ship with Linux out of the box. They're based in Germany, but they sell to most countries in the world, and they have a big range of computers that will fit every price point and every need, from ultrabooks, giant workstations, gaming towers, gaming laptops, you name it. They even announced a 3-in-1 convertible with a touchscreen now. All of them support Linux perfectly, and they're the only computers I use for any of my needs these days. The channel is ran entirely on one of their notebooks, and I do all my gaming on one of their desktops. So if you need a new computer, you plan to run Linux on it, and you want to support a company that actually contributes to Linux, click the link in the description below and check out Tuxedo Computers. In the meantime, thank you all for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, all the usual YouTube buttons are here for you to click on them. And if you really enjoyed the channel, I have links in the description to support it, and you'll get a bunch of cool perks in the process. So thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!